Donald Trump has once again sparked international headlines after refusing to meet with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, signaling a fresh escalation in the ongoing trade feud between the United States and Canada. The decision comes amid rising tensions over tariffs, trade negotiations, and a politically charged advertising campaign that has infuriated the former U.S. president. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. In remarks made aboard Air Force One, Trump declared that he had no plans to meet with Carney during the upcoming Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation (APEC) summit in Korea, bluntly stating, "I don't want to meet with him, no. I'm not going to be meeting with him for a while." He went on to describe Canada as one of the most difficult countries to deal with, though he added that he continues to love Canada and its people. The refusal to meet follows Trump's announcement that he will impose an additional 10% tariff on Canadian goods and halt all ongoing trade discussions between the two nations. His decision appears to have been influenced by an ad campaign he described as fake and deeply disrespectful. The controversial ad, which was sponsored by the government of Ontario and featured the late U.S. President Ronald Reagan, criticized Trump's trade policies and portrayed them as harmful to American workers. The ad quickly became a lightning rod in both countries. Trump reportedly viewed it as an act of betrayal from one of America's closest allies, prompting his sharp response. Meanwhile, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, whose administration financed the campaign, remained unapologetic despite the diplomatic fallout. Ford defended the move, saying, "We have achieved our goal, to start a conversation with the American people and their elected officials. And my goodness, it started all right. The best ad that ever ran, I'll tell you." He went on to explain that the campaign was never meant to antagonize Trump personally, but rather to highlight the economic risks of an unfair trade deal. "My intention was never to poke the president in the eye," Ford said. "My intention was to inform the American people that this is serious and it's going to cost you jobs if we don't secure a fair deal with your closest friend and ally." In contrast, Prime Minister Mark Carney struck a more diplomatic tone. Speaking on the sidelines of a regional summit in Malaysia, Carney expressed a willingness to restart trade talks whenever the United States is ready. "We stand ready to sit down with the United States, myself with the president, my colleagues with their colleagues, when the U.S. is ready to sit down," he said. Despite his conciliatory remarks, Carney confirmed that he had not had any contact with President Trump during his time in Kuala Lumpur. The breakdown in communication marks another low point in the U.S.-Canada trade relationship, which has been strained since Trump's administration began imposing steep tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other goods from Canadian producers. While both sides have previously signaled interest in renegotiating parts of the existing trade framework, this latest clash appears to have frozen any immediate progress. Still, markets showed cautious optimism earlier in the day as global stocks rallied following Trump's statement that he expects to come away with a deal after meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping later this week. Investors interpreted his comments as a sign that, despite the deepening dispute with Canada, the U.S. may still be open to compromise with other major trading partners. Trump's current overseas trip is filled with high-profile engagements. After landing in Japan, he met with Emperor Naruhito at the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, an event marked by ceremony and mutual respect. Later in the week, he is scheduled to meet with Japan's first female prime minister, Sanae Takaichi, to discuss regional security and trade cooperation in the face of growing economic competition from China. Behind the scenes, however, the diplomatic tension with Canada looms large. Analysts suggest Trump's decision to target Canada could be part of a broader strategy to pressure U.S. allies into making more favorable concessions on trade. By taking a hardline stance, the former president may be seeking to project strength ahead of his upcoming negotiations with Beijing. But others warn that such moves risk alienating traditional allies and undermining long-standing partnerships that have historically benefited both nations. Canada remains one of America's closest trading partners and a critical component of North American economic stability. Political observers note that prolonged hostilities between the two could disrupt supply chains, increase costs for consumers, and strain cross-border cooperation on key issues such as energy, defense, and climate policy. For now, both sides appear to be waiting for the other to blink. While Carney's team maintains that Canada is open to dialogue, Trump's insistence on walking away from the table has cast a shadow over future relations. Whether this is a negotiating tactic or a genuine breakdown remains to be seen. As Trump continues his tour through Asia, balancing meetings with global leaders and pushing his America First trade agenda, the world will be watching closely to see if his hardline approach yields results or further isolates the U.S. from its traditional allies. The atmosphere surrounding international trade had grown increasingly tense in recent weeks, and at the heart of the storm stood former U.S. President Donald Trump, once again making headlines with his uncompromising stance. His recent decision to refuse a meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney sent shockwaves across political circles and global markets, signaling a deepening rift between two nations long regarded as steadfast allies. The tension, though rooted in economic disagreements, carried undertones of political defiance, bruised pride, and competing visions for North America's future. Trump's refusal came at a critical time. On board Air Force One, as journalists pressed him about whether he would meet Carney during the upcoming Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Korea, Trump's response was blunt and unmistakably final. "I don't want to meet with him, no. I'm not going to be meeting with him for a while," he said, his tone carrying the weight of both irritation and certainty. Then came the words that encapsulated the strained relationship between the two leaders. "One of the most difficult countries to deal with has been Canada, as much as I love Canada itself and the people of Canada." Those words revealed a complicated sentiment, affection for the nation, but open disdain for its leadership. Behind this public declaration lay a growing sense of frustration from Washington over what Trump described as Canada's lack of cooperation in revising trade policies. Only hours before his remarks, Trump had announced new tariffs, an additional 10% tax on Canadian goods, while abruptly terminating all ongoing trade talks. The announcement came as a shock to many observers, especially since discussions had been progressing, albeit slowly. But Trump's patience appeared to have worn thin after learning about a Canadian ad campaign that portrayed his trade policies as harmful to American workers. He dismissed the campaign as fake, describing it as an insult wrapped in propaganda. What especially incensed him was the use of the late former U.S. President Ronald Reagan's image, which Trump viewed as a manipulative attempt to turn public sentiment against him. The ad in question was financed by the Ontario government under the leadership of Premier Doug Ford. It was intended to highlight the risks of an unbalanced trade arrangement and to appeal directly to the American public to reconsider Trump's tariff strategy. But instead of sparking thoughtful debate, it ignited a political firestorm. To Trump, it was more than a policy disagreement, it was a betrayal. In his eyes, Canada, once the loyal neighbor and economic partner, had crossed a line by publicly challenging his policies in such a personal way. Premier Doug Ford, however, appeared undaunted by the backlash. Standing firm amid the mounting criticism, he defended his government's decision to fund the advertisement, claiming it had achieved exactly what it was meant to do. "We have achieved our goal, to make sure that conversation starts with the American people, and with their elected officials," Ford said with characteristic boldness. "And my goodness, it started all right. The best ad that ever ran, I'll tell you." His words carried a mix of pride and defiance, underscoring the widening divide between the two nations' leaders. Ford insisted his intentions were not to provoke the American president personally, but to raise awareness of the potential consequences if trade relations continued to deteriorate. "My intention was never to poke the president in the eye," he said. "My intention was to inform the American people this is serious, and it's going to cost you jobs if we don't have a fair trade deal with your closest friend and ally." While Ford's words resonated with many Canadians who felt the U.S. had been unfair in its trade demands, they did little to soothe the growing fury inside the White House. Behind closed doors, aides described Trump as deeply irritated by what he saw as public humiliation. To him, Ford's comments represented the larger issue, the world's tendency to underestimate America's resolve and take advantage of its economic strength. That frustration, Trump believed, was what had led to decades of lopsided trade deals, something he had vowed to correct since his earliest campaign days. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Mark Carney, who had tried to keep communication lines open amid the chaos, attempted to adopt a more diplomatic tone. Speaking to reporters on the sidelines of a summit in Malaysia, Carney expressed his readiness to return to the negotiating table whenever the U.S. was prepared to engage. "We stand ready to sit down with the United States, myself with the President, my colleagues with their colleagues, when the U.S. is ready to sit down," he said calmly, projecting an image of patience and reason. Yet his tone also hinted at disappointment, as he later admitted he had not had any direct contact with Trump while in Kuala Lumpur. For Carney, the challenge was balancing national pride with the practical need to preserve one of Canada's